The tools you know define your work. And this talk is about a new tool. It's Squishy Volumes. Squishy Volumes is an extension for Blender that allows you to simulate squishy stuff. And this extension is based on something called MPM, or Material Point Method. We have had a hint at this in the last talk. And we will talk about MPM in general, and then we will see how to use this new tool in Blender. So, you can try it out for yourself. Please note this QR code will be on the final slide as well, so you don't have to scan it now. So it's our mission at Algebraic to make MPM easily accessible to the Blender community. We have only just started our journey, but we've already found that Blender is a near perfect fit for our tech. So please be invited to join our journey. For a very simple setup, like this bouncing cube on the title slide, this is what the UI looks like. With Blender and Squishy Volumes, you can get a physics simulation set up and running in under 2 minutes. So, what is MPM, the Material Point Method? It is a physics-based simulation method that enables fantastic animations. It's very flexible. You can do rigids, rubber, water, sand, all in one. And I'm sure everybody can find at least one item on this list that is interesting for them. So maybe for you that's biological tissue. Or you want to do some mudslide simulation. MPM got you covered. Personally, I'm interested in all of them. So who am I? Hi, I'm Lars. Nice to meet you. I've been tinkering with MPM for the better part of the last decade. And now I can share many of the things that I've learned. So MPM is very versatile, and Squishy Volumes will give you access to all of its potential. But again, it's early days for this extension, so we can only offer a fraction of this huge potential. But with Blender, we are in luck, because we can offload all of our visualization and have it completely customizable at the same time. So now I want to show you a few clips made in Blender with Squishy Volumes, so you can get an idea of what we already have. So for example, you can use any old mesh as input. Bam! There goes the M. Notice how some of these letters even break. Isn't that awesome? Thanks to Blender, it's very easy to go from text to mesh, of course. We can also animate boundaries for maximum destruction. And in this case, the bowl is set to no friction. And we have fluids. This is inspired by a Netflix series. Can you guess which one? So this is a small scale scene, and this is a larger scale scene. Notice that we can use a wide range of visualization techniques, and most of it is powered by geometry nodes. Again, that means it's completely customizable. We can also give the fluid some viscosity. And these clips are a mere taste of what you can do with MPM. So we had elastic solids and fluids, but we also can simulate some granular materials like sand in this hourglass. And to be honest, most of these clips are just viewport renders, and you, who are the real artists, can probably do a much better job at making this pop. Yeah, and we can have all three types together in a single simulation. This is really the superpower of MPM. And here's the same one, but it's hammer time. Bam. So it's really just also fun to play around with. If our boundary has open edges, we can use it to cut stuff. And of course, Blender makes it super easy to animate the blade here. Later in the talk, we will recreate a very simple, similar scene step by step. It will be simpler. This is a different form of cutting, and it's especially amazing to me since I worked in the field of CNC a bit. Have you ever even seen a simulation of a CNC mill like this? Squishy Volumes gives you access to all of the simulation data, and here we can see the elastic energy. And this is actually the default visualization provided with geometry nodes created by Squishy Volumes. We can also do slow motion simulations. We need a few more features implemented, but then we can also do something like a cannonball going through a pirate ship. And here's another manufacturing method, casting. Sometimes we have to fake it a bit. This was actually two different simulations stitched together. And Squishy Volumes allows you to orchestrate multiple simulations, which was very helpful in this case. Okay, now we want to get rid of this old tree. But it's too strong for these chains. So we can tweak the physical properties, make the chain stiffer. Not stiff enough. Let's go even further. Almost. It's actually quite hard to simulate very stiff materials. So here we just say enough is enough, and we use animated boundaries instead. Oh my god, so cool. Okay, just one last one. Okay. So I think these clips hint at the potential quite well. And NPM offers so much more, and the tight integration with Blender makes this really accessible. Shout out to geometry nodes. They have been crucial also in the development because they allow you to create debug views on the fly. They are just perfect for visualizing scientific data, and there's also another talk the day after tomorrow about SciBlend that goes more into the direction of visualizing scientific data. Now, I want you to look under the hood with me, and we are going to focus on the basics. That means we don't need background in math or physics or even programming. I want to demystify NPM at least a bit, and this goes a long way to make you a power user of NPM. So, we will assemble this algorithm together, step by step. And at the core is this loop. Each time we run this loop, we get to advance a little bit in time. And we scatter, collect, and advect. This is also known as particles to grid, grid to particles, and move particles. And we have to execute this core loop several times to get a frame we can display. And then there's more boilerplate stuff for I/O, but we will focus on the core loop. Now, the particles are actually the points in the material point method, and the particles and the grid, or the grid nodes, are our fundamental data structures. Okay, whenever you start implementing a new algorithm, it's a good idea to first get sidetracked. And maybe we can get famous by solving this Open Millennium Prize problem. It's related to fluid simulation. These giants of old have formalized some rules for us, but we intuitively understand these rules. If you squish stuff, it pushes back. So that last slide was more about continuum mechanics. This one is about NPM. And the idea of using particles and grid nodes to simulate stuff is actually quite old. Around the time I was born, NPM first appears. Now, jump ahead to the musical fantasy film Frozen. So Disney actually used NPM to simulate the snow. And from this point on, we see an exponential increase in research on this topic. And thanks to this research, we now have this amazing technology. It's quite matured. Also note that Maya and later Houdini already got their NPM solver. So, enough sidetracking. We need to divide up our simulation domain into bits where we can evaluate and enforce our rules. And surface meshes are actually the same idea. We approximate this continuous sphere with discrete vertices and connections between them. And of course, the interior is hollow. When we're simulating physics, we do something similar, but to capture everything that goes on inside, we need to sample the whole volume. By the way, Blender's native soft bodies do not do this, and instead simulate an elastic shell. And while this tends to look a bit like balloons, it's very fast. So in NPM, we do it differently. So we split up our stuff into million little voxels, similar to Minecraft. These are the particles. And each of them independently tracks certain physical properties. Most importantly, each tracks their own local deformation. And here's a visualization of these properties. So we have volume, mass, velocity, deformation. Note that we do not have any explicit connections between these particles. It's not like a volume mesh in FEM. And the material doesn't have to be homogeneous either. So you can have a coconut, for example, with a hard shell and a liquid interior. Be aware. This gets expensive fast, and it's faster than you may think. It's not a problem to go from one coconut to two coconuts. It will just take twice as long to simulate. But if you want to have more details, so you subdivide your domain, you halve the size of the particles in each direction. Can you guess how long it will take? Is it like 2 times, 3 times, 4 times? It's actually 16 times as long. So why? So we get 8 times more particles because we are volume sampling. But then we also need to run the core loop twice as often to capture all of the interactions correctly. So in a sense, we pay in all 4 dimensions, time included. So this might become more clear in a second. The particles are actually only half the story. We also have the grid nodes. And we will have these models as mental images. So it can be a bit tricky to get your head around this, so I really want to motivate having these 2 different things. Both of them are representations of our simulated world, and both are perfectly capable of being a standalone simulation. But we want to combine their strengths. And we do this by bouncing information back and forth between the 2 representations. So let's focus on the particles again. You can think about them like tiny weather balloons. We can spawn them in any configuration or density, and they will just move with the flow. They are attracted with the velocity field. This makes them super useful for tracking where stuff is. However, imagine you know the temperature at each of their locations, and now you want to reason about some temperature about a temperature gradient at some other place. Not so easy. That is because their unstructured nature makes this troublesome. And this is where the grid comes in. So the grid nodes have complementary strengths. Think of them like tiny communication and accumulation centers. They form a stationary neat grid that spans all of space. They are all equidistant. This makes computing gradient very robust and stable. Easy and robust. But it's harder to track where the mass is. So stuff needs to be passed around between the nodes, and it can be between nodes. You have to make sure not to lose or gain any mass. So that is where the particles excelled. And that is why we want both. Okay, I want to stress that the information is only passed between particles and grid nodes, and not directly between particles. So this is like the flow of information. The particles accumulate on the grid nodes and then goes back to the particles. And this exchange happens in every iteration of the core loop that we are about to implement. And that's the core loop again. So this is an abstract visualization, really. We scatter, we collect, and then we advect. So the particles scatter their information to the grid nodes, where it is accumulated, then they collect it back, and then they advect. Note that the exchange is distance-weighted and limited to a few local nodes. And here we see this distance weighting. So it's a function that is centered around each particle, and it's shaped like a bell. You have a peak in the middle, and then it falls off to 0. If the bells of two particles overlap, they can interact via the nodes that are in this overlapping region. So this was a bit simplified. In 3D, there are more nodes. At any time, there are actually 3 by 3 by 3 nodes that have non-zero weights to this particle. And it will be the same set of nodes as long as the particle stays within this indicated box. Otherwise, it will be a different set. So we now have particles, we have the grid nodes, and we can exchange information based on locality. We can start to implement our core loop. So let's start by scattering the mass from the particles to the grid. Here the models are a little bit simpler for clarity. And we will need the mass on the grid to mix up the velocities correctly in the next step. Think momentum. A light particle can push heavy ones. The other way around. You get it. Right, now we are getting to the exchange of velocities. So this has two parts. First, we scatter from the particles to the grid, accumulate, taking mass into account, and then we collect back this mixed result. And this is actually how MPM can simulate collisions. Because we are doing this via the nodes, the collisions are fuzzy and resolution dependent. And one of the reasons why MPM is so expensive at lower resolutions is just this. We don't do continuous collision detection, so we need to take some smaller time steps. Okay, so I said each particle tracks their own deformation, and now we update it. This is the only point in the algorithm where we update the deformation, and we can use the velocity information we've collected from the grid, and it will fit perfectly with the movement of the other stuff around this particle. Looks like this. Okay, however, we need to be careful. When we apply too much of this update at once, our particles can become inverted and our simulation breaks. Usually we can get around this by, again, doing smaller time steps, so the particle has time to fight back. So we are almost ready. We have collisions and we have deformation. Can you guess what is missing at this point? Resistance, yes, resistance to being squished, like an elastic response. The material is just collapsing at the moment. And this is probably the most tricky part. So take this particle, for example. It has been squished in the Z direction, and it has a lot of elastic energy right now, which is a function of the deformation. And it wants to release this energy. We know that the deformation is only updated through the grid node velocities. So we need to change those. This animation will give you an idea of on how to find the correct change. And the basic idea is to take individual grid nodes and just wiggle their velocities, trying different directions. Then, all the while, the particle is going to react accordingly, and we will see in the background as a black graph the elastic energy and a yellow ball that tracks how well we are doing. So lower is better. Okay, so Notice that in the X and Y directions, we are trapped in a kind of valley. But in the Z direction, we can release a lot of elastic energy. And this makes sense intuitively, because we are squished in the Z direction. We can also release a little bit of energy in the X and Y direction by squishing out to the side. And this is actually how we get this buckling effect that you know from just normal stuff. So once we've done this for all these single individual grid nodes, we can combine everything in a weighted sum, and weighted depending on the energy release rate. And yeah, this is how we get the forces. Adding the forces has implications that might not be immediately clear. So without further modifications, we actually already get cohesion as well as separation. Separation, there we go. It still amazes me that this behavior just emerges from our local pushing and pulling. And that means we're done. The simulation works as intended now, and this is vanilla NPM. Okay, let's summarize the steps one more time. In scatter, we find the active set of nodes for each particle and scatter mass and velocity, and then add the elastic forces on top. Then revert the flow of information, collect back the results, and update our deformations. And finally, we just move the particles. Okay. To celebrate, we treat ourselves a squishy lava cake. Now, you cannot simulate something like this with vanilla NPM. We are missing a few features. But once you have the foundation, it is relatively easy to extend it. Okay. So now we have an idea of how this works from a theoretical standpoint. Maybe you can imagine that a lot of the material behavior can be controlled by tweaking that part with the forces. And indeed, changing this detail gives us a lot of flexibility and all these cool animations with completely different materials. Now, we will see how this power can be accessed from within Blender. And I want to give you a quick overview of the workflow in Squishy Volumes, and then we will build a scene together. So to get started, simply download Blender 4.5, visit our website, find the link to the GitHub releases, download the files. And then you can install this via drag and drop. And this is the video from the start again, not as fast. And this is actually our in-UI tutorial. So you can just follow the red buttons, and there's also some helpful texts in between you might want to read, or don't. And then again, within 2 minutes, you will have this Jello cube. So to summarize what we just did here, we defined some input. We started the simulation, and then we got the output. That is basically the workflow. And here is it in a more abstract way. And after this, we will cut up some stuff. So we start with normal geometry and animations in Blender. And then in addition, you get to define some physical properties. For example, stiffness, or how volume conserving it should be. And then you can change between a solid, a fluid, and a collider. Sands are actually also solids. Then you write to cache, and this is a very important concept in Squishy Volumes. it creates a cache directory, and in there is a setup.json that contains all of the information that is needed for running the simulation. That means that when you want to change something, it will not automatically update and overwrite your cache, but you have to manually click that button. Okay, then you do click that button and you simulate, and in parallel it will create a few of those simulation frames. While this is happening, you can already define some output, and you can get, for example, the original input geometry, which is helpful for debugging. But you can also get the animated dynamic outputs. And this includes a distance grid, which is how we handle colliders. The momentum grid, this is the grid that we were talking about in the theory section. And then something more related to colliders, fluids, and solids. Now I want to stress again that we visualize this output, which is essentially just a mesh of points with a lot of attributes, with geometry nodes. And you can really go ham. You can do instances on points, which we've seen a lot now. We can do surface reconstruction, just go from points to volume to mesh again. Or you could drive other meshes, and this is one of the very cool features. We will see it in a second. Okay, but enough overview. Let's cut some nigiri. So this is the scene that we will be working towards. And you shouldn't do this in real life, it's bad manners. So let's just start by creating some very basic geometry. I'm sure everybody is able to do this. Always name your stuff. Okay, but maybe it's a little bit too basic, right? So we can actually use NPM as a modeling tool as well. So not to get an animation, but some new static geometry. And this is how this works. So we go create a new simulation. And then we define our inputs. Here the salmon is going to be a solid, and then we define the rice as a collider. And then we start the simulation, and we get the output. And it breaks immediately. Okay, too soft. We can tweak it a bit, change the stiffness, and run the simulation again. Looks much better already. Yeah, and it's often this tweaking. Now we tweak the geometry a little bit. Yeah, and maybe this looks nice. Okay, but it's just these colored cubes, and we wanted to have like some new static geometry. And what we can do is take the output of our simulation and advect the mesh. It's a little bit like skinning. So it's called move with particles. You select a reference frame. It bugs out for a second. That's normal. And you get these auxiliary structures. You can hide them. And the mesh is moving. And you can imagine that this is super useful when you have, for example, like UV coordinates on the mesh or something like this. Okay, I just want to hint how this is done. I think it's really cool. Geometry nodes, of course. Basically what we do is we take the surface vertices, we find the closest particle in the reference frame, and then we store the offset in that particle's space. Okay, and we store like the index and the offset. And then with the animated particles, we look up that index again and we calculate this deformed offset. Yeah, and that's how that works. Okay, now we are ready for the real simulation, the main simulation. And in any good physics simulation, you first have to add a flaw. So it's very easy. So we remove that first simulation. We only needed that to create the input for our real simulation. And we add a flaw, a little bit bigger, place it correctly. Yep, set as a collider, and then re-add the solids. Okay, now when we go back to our new outputs, we can see that it does something. It wobbles, looks interesting maybe, but certainly not right, not like sushi. And there are two main issues with this material. One is that it's totally out of scale. So if we look at the input geometry again, we can see that it's like 5 meters. So it's a ton of sushi. And we can tell the simulation here, scale everything down by a factor of 10. And then it will just adjust the physical parameters so that it works correctly. And when we look at the simulation again now, yeah, it looks like a smaller thing. But it may be still a little bit too bouncy for our taste, so we can add some dynamic viscosity, which essentially does some damping of this elasticity. Oh, okay. So our particle got inverted. Some particle got inverted. That's too bad. And this is just a current limitation of the extension. We will implement a better heuristic, so this won't happen as much. But as I said in the theory part, the fix for this is usually just to decrease the time step a little bit. Yeah, that's in the bake section there. Okay, now we are kind of happy with the way our material acts. So yeah, let's get cutting. And this is really, again, just more Blender than it is squishy volumes. So we add a plane, and we give it a path animation, and yeah, make it look a little bit more like a knife. Yeah, we have to make sure that it's actually cutting our geometry, so we have to place it correctly. Okay, that looks good now. But it's not cutting. And why is that? Because we haven't added as a input to our simulation. Now, squishy volumes will just realize that it's animated and take this animation into account for the simulation. So we go back to the inputs, we add it as a collider, and it's important to set the friction to 0 for anything that should cut stuff. Otherwise, it's going to drag along like material. Okay, but yeah, now it's cutting. Isn't that cool? And it was really just like this path animation. If we wanted to do more cuts or, I don't know, something else entirely, like a rotating blade, maybe everything is possible. Okay, let's, okay, so I should say, this is really where we will stop with our simulation. And now everything that follows is more visualization. So we have like the physical simulation done. And now we just want to get rice and salmon instead of colored cubes. So let's start with the rice. And this is the geometry node setup that you get by default. And please just go ahead and drag it. Here we change it to spheres, and then we add another transform and make ellipsoids. And then we add some random rotation as well. Okay, and I was kind of lying. We do simulate one more time, but just to get some more randomness in our particle positions. Okay, and this looks a little bit like rice. to me, except maybe for the colors. And this is, of course, a very easy fix. You just go back into this geometry node setup and you find the part that sets the colors. That's that, skip it, bam, gone, set a new material. Okay, that's the rice done. Now, for the salmon, we have to do a little bit more tricky, something more tricky. And the reason for this is that we have cut surfaces with the salmon, and cut surfaces are kind of hard. So let's just look at what we are doing here. If we go with our current resolution and we try the reconstruction, it looks very blocky. So what we can actually do is create another simulation just to get like a higher resolution point cloud at the location of the salmon. And then we will use this move with particles again, this skinning thing, to move to upsample basically our low resolution simulation. So this is really, I was saying it's a bit like skinning. It's really not like skinning in this sense because you can also advect like point clouds. It's like, it's not a skin per se. Yeah, and we are happy with this, like with the shape right now, but it's not moving. That I guess I kind of said it already. We are going to do this move with particles trick again. And in this case, we have to make sure that we first move the particles and then do the reconstruction. So it's just a matter of ordering the modifiers correctly. And when we do this, we get this. And this is like looking pretty good from a geometry perspective. And we didn't need to simulate it at a higher resolution. That's the point. Okay, but now we have to shade it as well. And salmon has stripes. I think it's something like a muscle tissue and then a fat layer and muscle tissue again. And maybe we can get away with a wave texture here. Yeah, not really. The problem is that the waves do not move with the geometry. And we can do a cool trick here. I think this is also useful outside of squishy volumes. It's kind of simple, actually. What you do is you store the initial position in the point cloud that you're advecting. Then you do a reverse proxy sampling, and you get like the initial world coordinate on the reconstructed surface. So I will just show you how it's done. Yeah, so store the position, get rid of everything we don't need, sample from the advected point cloud the nearest, and then get that initial position again. And I can't stress how powerful this is. I can't stress enough how powerful this is. We now have the possibility to have like some solid, some mesh. You cut it, and then you have on the cut surfaces like the initial world coordinates. And you can imagine maybe some fractal design, interior design, some like a cake maybe, something like this. And then you cut it up and you can really see inside what it looks like. Yeah, and I think this looks really good now, or for my taste anyway. And all that's left is to render it. Okay. Again, I'm sure you will do a much better job at this than I can. I'm not an artist in that way. Okay, so let's take a moment and look back at the last 40 minutes. We have seen that NPM is versatile and powerful. We have some idea of how it works in theory. That was like the particles and the grid nodes. And our squishy volume extension gives you easy access to NPM's power. And we've already known this. Blender is awesome. So we are nearing the end of the talk. Allow me a few final words. It's been fun. Preparing for this talk has pushed the limits of squishy volumes a lot. I'm so happy to be here. I appreciate the interest. I tip my hat to you. And let's get in touch. Ask me about any details. Usage, implementation, theory. I love to talk about this stuff. And on our website are further links to our various social media outlets and also our Discord server. So I can't wait to hear the rest of BeaCon tomorrow, and this talk's over. You do want to ask some questions? Please go ahead. There, yeah, okay. Yes. Yep. We didn't do a re-simulation there. It was just, it looked too much like it would poke through, even though it didn't. It's just like the rise geometry was like. You can also like do a solidify modifier on the knife, and then it would also probably not poke through, but it's just what we did there. Yeah.
So you show how the animation keyframes work on the collider. Does it also work on the fluids and solids themselves? And if you animate this, that this actually can exert force onto the particles in your thing? Like, can you twist something with a just keyframing your rotation and then let it just splats out?
Okay, so I think I know what you mean. It's like, can we give some more artistic direction to the solids and fluids? Yeah. So currently you can only give it like initial velocity and angular velocity, but that's definitely high up on our list to make this happen as well. Yeah.
Can you do fabric being ripped?
Yeah, definitely. This one.
Simulation you showed was like a large scale simulation. It was fluid simulation where you had buildings that were being being pushed by the liquid. Is that all happening at once, or is the fluid actually pushing?
Okay, so this is a question about the tsunami scene, and indeed the small little houses are elastic solids, and they are like bidirectionally interacting with the water. I think so too.
So I know there are like hundreds of YouTube tutorials on making lava materials, and then everyone's disappointed when they try and apply that to a fluid, and then the cool texture doesn't follow the fluid. It's a little bit like that, the initial salmon texture failing. Is that trick you showed at the end, can that also be used so that lava flows or like interesting, or mud flows with interesting surfaces like follow the fluid the way we want?
Yeah, I think so. So the question was this trick with the surface and the textures like staying in place as the reconstructed surface appears to move. Indeed, that can also work for lava and mud flows, stuff like that. Yeah. Sorry, you were already this.
I was going to ask on that same point, can you use that for UVs as well? Because the wave texture is actually procedural. Can you stick like a UV to a mesh and then like initialize that UV point and get that to melt as well? So the UV sort of follows the fluid.
I have not thought about this yet. So the idea is if you can also have like UV on reconstructed meshes. I don't see why not. Yeah, I think you could make this happen. Yeah, I mean, you have the original world position if you have some way to map this to your UVs, maybe by just looking at a reference object, sure. Well, yeah, good idea. Yeah.
First thing I want to do is crank up the resolution. Speak a little more about how the performance scales, and is this technique also amenable to GPU acceleration?
Yes, good question. So this is future work. We are working towards a GPU accelerated version as well. And we are also hoping to make it like not only NVIDIA. But please check back with us in like a month or 2 or 3. Yeah, back there.
Does so from the sushi that you made, that was a clean cut. Is there a way to make it so it's not so clean?
So the question is, can we also have cuts that are like more like not clean, basically? Yes. You have to go a bit higher in the resolution there, and we also need some damage models there. It's a feature that we are still needing to implement. But basically, then you can check like, is this material stressed enough? And if it is, it will just like give way, and then it will do a more messy cut, I guess.
Can NVIDIA do like dynamic resolution? So along with
Yeah.
high res and the rest of the standard is lower res?
Yeah, so there is definitely research going into this direction, and never mind that. There's definitely research going into that direction, but it's a little bit lower on our list to implement this. Yeah. But yeah, definitely. Also in the time domain, by the way, you can do space and time domain specific to location and so on.
If you get it right now, does it update automatically, or do you have to keep getting another version?
That is a good idea. We did not yet implement this package index thing. Yeah, I will look into it. But currently it's actually a little bit ugly. So you have to disable the add-on, then pull in the new version, and then you can use it. Yeah. Sorry, can you just repeat the question? Yeah, so when the question is about mixing different fluids. So the way that it works with this pot, where the soup was the magic potion was being prepared, it's just you define different objects as original inputs, and the outputs will be also the names that you give as input. So you will get like actually 2 different fluid outputs, and you can then color them however you like, or combine them and whatever. A follow-up question maybe directly? So the question is, can we also mix fluids to get, for example, from blue and red a purple fluid? Answer is yes. I think you would just kind of see, are there 2 particles near that are from the different original objects, and then mix up the colors like this. No. Back. Okay. Yeah. There's just a physical property that you set for density. Yeah, I've seen simulations. I must say that I haven't tried it myself, but I don't think that it should work. It should work. Yeah. Please do try it and let me know. Yeah. Question here in the front?
Can you do like boiling water?
So boiling water is super hard. Phase transitions are super hard. It's possible, but I think this technology isn't really matured enough that we want to include it in our simulation.
Can you do ice?
Yeah, ice. Ice is definitely possible. It's just like a very stiff solid. Okay, yeah.
Can you support vertex groups? So if you want to stick like parts of a mesh to another mesh, for example, if you want to tear, like say sheet paper, for example, could you have vertex groups on either side to stick them all further apart? Does that make sense?
I think it probably makes sense. So it's a question about vertex groups. I think I have to pass on this one because it sounds like something that I first need to wrap my head around, and that might take time.
Vertices to a vertex group, so you can like have parts of it just stuck to a mesh, and then the rest of it will be simulated.
Does that mean simulation on a vertex group? Not the whole mesh, but the vertex group.
Yeah, so I guess why not? Like you can just in a geometry nodes modifier you can exclude whichever vertices you do not want to move. So you have to like modify a little bit this move with particles modifier, but I think it's possible. Yeah, in the back.
Can you make the squishy ball, a balloon inflate with the liquid and rip?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's like similar to this coconut example that I was going at earlier. So you would just like not make it as hard an exterior shell, maybe. Yeah. Make sure that the thickness of the balloon is kind of thick enough for your resolution, though. Otherwise, you might not get what you want. In the back.
Yeah. So when you're talking about resolution scales, is it purely of the grid itself, or is it also of the number of points? And is there a certain like limit between like
Yeah.
the relationship between points versus grid, like number of points per grid point or scale for grid?
So actually, there are two kinds of resolutions in NPM. One is the grid node resolution, that is the one that is really expensive. And then there's the particle resolution that is not as expensive. And yeah, you just have like a factor. Currently, I think the default is 0.5, so you have like 2 particles per grid node direction. So you have like per cell, I guess, 8 particles. Yeah.
Are you able to make an animation of something getting cut, but not with a sharp knife,
Yeah.
like the sushi was cut with very
Yeah.
sharp knife?
Yes, indeed. I think we had a similar question before, and it's basically that you have to have like some damaging of the material so that it can be cut by blunt force, I guess, and then it will rip more naturally, more messy. Okay, I think, yeah. Thank you again.